So now that you know a little bit about me, now in this lesson, we're going to kind of go into the tools you'll need to know how to animate in Maya. So there's a couple things you need to do first regarding your preferences. So if you go over here to your preferences, if you go to time slider, play by every frame is going to be there by default. You don't want that. So you want 24 FPS by 1. This is saying 24 frames per second. That's how your animation is going to play. And that's kind of how we talk about animation too. We kind of label like what frame it is instead of saying like seconds really. So we're doing 24 frames per second. Another one is you want to go to animation right here and say it might not be set to parallel. So we just want to make sure to set it to parallel. And GPU override is on, and this is also checked. We can leave these the same for now to auto. That's just how it's going to be for now. I'll get back to that. For the graph editor UI, we want it to be classic. Classic is just more streamlined. It's a little bit simpler. So we want that for sure. The rest you can just leave alone for now. The first thing that we need to see is timeline. So this is your timeline right here. What it is that I'm scrubbing across frames over time. So if I go to frame 24, that's 1 second, from 1 to 24. So if I create a polygon right here, a sphere comes up, and let's say we're just going to animate this one thing. So if you press S, we can set a key. Key is a keyframe. And this is a stamp in distance at a certain time. So I'm setting a keyframe stamp at frame 1, right here. It's going to give us a red marker. So that red marker is saying, at frame 1, at this distance, set a key on the ball here, so the ball is going to stay here. So now we can scrub. You can just left click, drag across your timeline, and set your key to frame 24. And then we can move this ball anywhere you want. So take the manipulator. So if you press W, you can have a manipulator, or you can go here, and this is where you can kind of move around, like switch either translation or rotation or scale. So we are going to move it over here. Now what it's doing is that it's traveling within 24 frames, which is a second. It's traveling from this keyframe to this keyframe. So it's interpolating that in between. So that's the basics of animation. That's all we need to see for now. And that's what the timeline does. So you can have a lot of keys on your timeline. You don't just need 2. So I can set keys everywhere I want, and I can change where everything is going and change the position, or maybe I can change the scale even. Scaled it up, and then I'll scale it back down because I set a key here already. And before, I scaled it up over here already. So if I deleted this, it would be the same scale but a different translation because the translation is different over here. So I'll scale it up, and then it'll come back, and then I'll move it back to the center. So that is a looping animation. We've already technically animated something. This simple ball kind of nonchalantly moving around in space. So let's go back to the basics one more time before we go any further. So if you look in this direction here, this is your channel box. This is a super important tool seeing what your animation is doing. So we're going to bring it over here again, press S. Make sure this is on. This is auto key. So if you turn it off, every time you move, you have to make sure to press S, and you don't want to necessarily do that every time. So we're going to press auto key on, and now every time I move it, I don't have to press S, which is key, and it'll automatically make that change per keyframe that I'm on. So now it's kind of interpolating regularly. This is a channel box. This is one channel, this is another channel, this is another channel. Translate X is its location in X. This is your axes. So you can see Z is forward and back, so Y is up and down, and X is left to right. Let's zero these out. So only X is being affected. Let's say I want to do -4 unit. So that's going to move it -4 to the left. So that's all it's doing. And if we go to frame 12 in the middle, then we can kind of see that it's almost in the middle. It's not exactly 2, which it should be, if you think about it in a different way, and I'll get to that. But it's interpolating, and you can see what position it's in for any channel on any frame when it's interpolating or when it's on a keyframe. So let's say I want it to also translate up 10 units. So translate Y 10 units. So now it's going to go diagonally because both axes are doing things together. It's trying to go up and it's trying to go to this side at the same time, which means it's going to be moving diagonally. And let's add on top of that. Let's say we want to move it forward also 20. So now we're going up, we're going to the left still, and we're going forward. So that's what this kind of thing is doing. So now let's zero these out again. The channel box is kind of the primary, fastest, and most streamlined tool for editing any object's attributes. It lets you quickly change attributes values, set keys on keyable attributes, lock or unlock attributes, so you can lock them. If I go over here, select these, and say lock, I won't be able to affect them anymore. I'll just go here and unlock them. That's a right click, by the way. Right click, lock, unlock. And you can also key from here. Let's say this had no keys. I want to delete this. So if you look at it, there's no red little bar on Translate Y, which means it has no keys on it. So if I right click and say key selected, I can set a key. And you can even create expressions on attributes, which we won't get into this class. Don't worry about that for now. So that's kind of what the channel box is. And you see there's even a visibility. So it doesn't have to be these like translations or rotations or scales. It can be anything that the user or rigger sets. It's very variable in what the user will set. It can be a squash attribute or a stretch attribute, many things. It can be IK-FK switch, which we won't get into in this lesson, but for any animators listening, it's basically how you switch your hand modes. If I hotbox it, which is probably spacebar for you, and this is kind of the mode you want to be in right here, I go to Panels, Panel, Graph Editor, and I kind of scoot this over so it's kind of like taking over the bottom half of my screen. This is a graph editor. So this is a graphical representation of the interpolation, which is this curve right now, in between animation keys that you can modify. On the y-axis, so this right here, you have your distance. So this is different from this y-axis. This is a positional y-axis. This is just a graphical y-axis. So on the y-axis, you have your distance or your point in which you set the key for that channel. So right here, I'm on the translate Y channel, and there's no keys on that, so it's a flat line. There's no like actual distance being buried. But if you go to translate X, now we're changing the distance, because remember our translate X is -4. So we're changing this distance. This is represented as a curve. So on this, we have it at -4. This is -4. You can see it right here. That's a keyframe. And if we go to that frame, which is this red marker, red line over here, that represents where we're scrubbing on the timeline, we can see that it is -4. So this is a direct representation of what's happening over here in graphical form. When we scrub, we see this curve, and this is called an auto curve. This is creating an automatic ease in and ease out. So it's slowing out and then easing in. One of the principles of animation, actually. That's the principle to smooth motion. Let's see what happens if we make it linear, a straight line. So if we go to the middle now, you'll see it's pretty close to -2. But now it's just creating a very like robotic animation, which you don't really want. So we're gonna go back to auto. So now on the y-axis you have distance, or your position for that channel. Channels are also over here. And on the x-axis, you actually have your time in frames. So these are 0 to 70 frames. And if you press Alt and right click, you can zoom in and out. And if you press Alt and Shift, you can kind of scale it in or out. And this is just changing the display. You see how like when I scale the display, where the 7 data is over here now, but when I scale it, 24 is over here. It's just changing the display so you can go in and make really fine tweaks. So what we can do now is we can go to frame 12, right click, say insert key, and move this. So when we move this, we're actually moving it over here because it's a direct representation of what is going on in the viewport. So we can even make it go up like the other way and then go to the left. So now we're making it go 2.772 units to the right on frame 12 and then making it go to the left on -4. So that's kind of what that looks like. So we can make very fine tweaks here. We can make the curve look like anything we want. So like I added another key and I'm bringing it down to create more of an ease out. And then I'm going to set a key over here and make it ease in even more. And I'm going to make sure the curve is smooth. So these are kind of like handles that you can use to create, kind of just like mess with the shape. Generally, you want your curves on every single channel, on every curve, to be relatively clean. So now, that's what it looks like, and it has a little more dynamic feeling. Because we messed with the curves to more so get an animation principle to be pushed, to be really used in a good way. Setting keyframes, the timeline, the graph editor, and channel box is super, super important. The basics of just Maya animation interface. And we really want to make sure we understand them. We can keep setting keys. We can make this really smooth. I have a hotkey, but you can keep going in and kind of pressing insert key, which is fine. I'm going to delete this one. I can just select a keyframe and delete it here, and it'll also delete it here on that keyframe. I'm going to go over here to frame 12 on the timeline. I just scrubbed over there. and I select it over here and I press delete. That deletes it over here and over here and over here for this channel only. If you delete a Translate X keyframe on a Translate X curve, it'll only delete the key on the Translate X channel, not the Translate Y or Z. Those will stay the same. This is kind of our time editor like scaling. We can go up to 200 frames, or we could just clamp it down to 24 frames. So let's do that because our animation ends at 24 frames. So that's kind of our first basic animation. Very, very basic. And we can do this for any channel. It's simply amazing because with these like really rudimentary tools, you can create something really awesome. And just this animation that hopefully you've also done if you're following along is amazing.